Fun fact, Peter Svidler's nickname in high school happened to be "Too Legit to Quit." I'm not exactly sure what the Russian translation was, but in round 2 of the 2019 FIDE World Cup from Khanty-Mansiysk, the Grandmaster from Russia was just that. Too legit on the board for the young man from Cuba to deal with. We're going to look at this game. It was my second favorite game from all those that were played in round 2 of Khanty-Mansiysk. We already had the video where Maghsoodloo played the white pieces versus another person from Russia, Maxim Shigeev, which you can check out in the notes below. But here we go. It's our second video, speaking of being too legit, from round 2 of the 2019 FIDE World Cup. And this right here is what happened. Peter Svidler played e4, and after c5, we had something that is about as popular as sliced bread was. I assume at some point in life, sliced bread was popular. This is the Rosalima or Moskva Sicilian. We saw it actually played twice against Magnus Carlsen at the 2019 Sinkfield Cup. Of course, Magnus, rather than the move d6, played here. Played g6 in both those games, and after bishop takes c6, b takes c6, we saw d4 played by both Viswanathan Anand and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, though against Vichy, if you remember, Magnus played bishop g7, and against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in the last round, where he won to tie it and eventually played Ding Liren in the playoffs, he played c takes d4. The analysis of those games done by Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky is actually included in my blog at Chess.com, so you can go check that out if you want. Of course, I would say that's the most popular, kind of in vogue, fashionable way that these Rosalimas are going right now, because Magnus Carlsen tends to set the tone. But as we said, Peter Svidler's young Cuban opponent did not want to go for that, instead played d6. And after castles, bishop d7, rook e1, we have a very, very standard approach to this position, which has been played for many, many years. The rook coming to e1 is twofold in its ideas, preparing both a retreat of this bishop to the f1 square, where the rook used to be, and of course putting the rook on the most useful central open file here. After knight f6, c3, preparing d4, we have exactly what we expect to happen in these Rosalimos, where it's not a traditional open Sicilian where white wants to play a move like d4 and give black the 2 center pawns versus 1. That's pretty much never something you see happen out of a Rosalima Sicilian, white going back to an open Sicilian idea. Playing c3 is more of an Alapin Sicilian idea, where you want to get d4 and take back with the pawn to get a big center or go home, as they say. Of course, the dysfunction of a move like c3 is that it does slow down your queenside development, but still, I'm just sort of setting the tone of what both sides want and explaining why black's next moves make sense. a6 invites white to give up the bishop pair rather than waste the tempo coming back to f1, saying, I know you moved the rook to use that square for the bishop, but are you really willing to lose a full developing move and come back? Because if you do it, as Svidler does, I get to play bishop g4, where I now pin the knight, who's one of the key pieces for not just hitting e5, but supporting d4, which was the whole purpose of your last move, c3. You play c3 to get d4, and so now this is going to be harder for you to do unless you're willing for your king side to become open. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to show you, because it happened in the game. Svidler played d4, and this is still theory. What white's saying here is, you know what? If and when you take on f3, I'm ready to open my king in order to get the big center for the rest of the game. Bishop takes f3 was played. Note that you have to open your king, because queen takes f3 just loses a pawn. That's kind of the whole point, right? The bishop came to g4 with this second developing move after white wasted a developing move because of that. So bishop takes can't be met with queen takes, because you lose a pawn, so you have to take with the pawn. And in this position, again, we have an immediately very interesting, very unbalanced affair. You have a big center for white, the bishop pair potential, but a wide open king and some positionally weak peshki to go with it, right? Black plays c takes d4, c takes, and then the very, very, I would say, thematic transition of the center pawn structure is d5. This move is key, because rather than let your opponent get a really nice big center and then sit there and beg for mercy, where white is choosing from all the different ways that he or she wants to open the center, with the move d5, black is forcing the position to become a little bit closed, which doesn't help the bishop pair, and saying, I'm not going to sit and wait for you to poke my knight. Something like this might even be met by things like d5 and f4, where white just kicks these knights around and just has a massive center to show for it. So those are the kind of lines that white is not going to get after black plays d5. So as we said, e5 is played, and now after knight h5, believe it or not, I've done everything I can to explain sort of the theory behind this line, what both sides want philosophically, but this position has actually been played before. This wasn't necessarily groundbreaking theory. But now we get to some of the critical moment where you have less and less games played by top players now, And so that means you start to look at these two players in terms of what they do, assuming that they're taking this from their computer chess engine that's working hard in their kitchen at home to give them some nice, tasty recipes to try over the board, right? So even though there's games that have been played earlier, usually if there's a lot of games, you assume the players are kind of playing things that have already been tested, roads that have been traveled by other top chess professionals. Their peers have shown that it's okay. But once you start to get to very few games, you really start to look at what the players are doing because it's their chance to maybe out-prepare the other. E6 is played here, and again, this is a move that has been played before. And right here is where the first novelty comes in. The young man from Cuba plays G6, but it wasn't necessarily a mistake. I actually spent a lot of time on this game, maybe more time than I should have, because I sometimes fall down the rabbit hole of thinking I'm a real chess player again, and then analyze these games to try to figure it out. I spent some time letting the engine think, and G6 actually is the best move according to the engine. So that wasn't necessarily a mistake. Just for those who really care, F takes E6 was the last time that two very, very strong grandmasters from China, Yu Yangyi and Bu Hongxi, played the position. Bu chose to take on E6. So if you're looking for what happened the last time two top grandmasters played it, that was the move. But G6 is okay. What you're saying is I'm not really that worried about you taking here because I'm going to play bishop G7, put my rook on the F file where you've got these double pawns, and I'm going to castle by hand, right? So if white doesn't do anything, if we just made some simple moves, black has some very nice ideas here. We've got weak pawns. We've got an F4 square that our rook and knight might work together on. So black is not afraid of you taking F7. That's kind of the idea behind G6 and maybe why the engine likes it. But Svidler was also prepared for this. He plays knight C3, doesn't take on F7. And after F5 now, he starts to show immediately that he had maybe a little more cooked up with the engine than his young opponent did. According to my analysis, and I don't have the engine depth that these guys do, but I spent some time looking at it, and I actually think knight G7 may have been the best approach here for black to try to force the issue, in the sense that if white does take F7, you take with the king, you try to then bring the queen up, bring the knight out, and kind of do the plan I talked about, where you finish castling by hand, and you've still got this weak pawn on D4 to target, and maybe the weak F pawns. I don't think Svidler would have taken. I analyzed that probably the best move was actually bishop H3, just to maintain the tension. But okay, that's you can see some of that in the blog. And what we'll say for here is that after playing what I think was the best move, the move F5 seems to go off the rails, and we start to see some really brilliant play here by the super grandmaster from Russia. A move that I give an exclam to is the move queen to B3. Just laughing in the face of danger, not just at the fact that you're losing the D4 pawn with tempo, but also the fact that you're losing the F3 pawn next with tempo and a fork that comes with it. Again, and I'll tweet the video at Peter and see what he'll tell us on the old Twitter sphere. You can follow me, you see right there. I wouldn't be surprised if almost this entire game from here on out was prepped by Peter, or at the very least he had looked at some ideas like this and kind of knew that white was maybe just winning by force, because to walk into these very, very sharp lines as white was really impressive by Svidler, and it starts to get pretty fun. So black, unfortunately, for the young man, he didn't have the discipline to not call Peter's bluff, and he took on D4. Maybe rook to B8 is met by bishop at F4 in some position, so he was worried about it. But the fact that it can't be played now made me think maybe you should go for this and try to trade D5 for D4. Also, bishop G7 to try to get the bleep out of dodge might have been okay too. But black takes on D4, and after queen takes B7, he plays rook B8 with tempo, and then takes the whole thing. Takes on F3 with check. The king moves to H1, and here we see where it really gets fun. Black plays queen to C7. This move looks pretty good. Okay, you're still threatening a free rook, and you're threatening H2. Let's point out, for those watching, why can't black just take the free rook? Well, there is a threat on the board. That's queen to C6 check. The king is actually checkmated here, because after queen D7, you have no more squares. So that's the threat in terms of why you can't just take the free rook yet. But queen C7 makes a lot of sense, because it's a double threat. You're actually now hitting H2 with checkmate and the rook. What could go wrong, right? We'll find out in a second. Before I show you that, I think the best move for black was probably bishop G7, allowing a move like queen C6 check that I analyzed, and after king F8, rook D1, white is definitely in good shape. The D5 pawn is hanging, and there is no more queen C7 or queen D6 to hit H2. So I think this was probably Peter's idea. Note that there is a crazy idea with this move, rook takes B2, where white is actually in big trouble if you take the free rook because of queen to B8, not just hitting B2, but actually every single one of these squares is owned by black, and you can't stop the checkmate threats over here. The only way to do it is to run the king, and black gets a huge attack. So I did spend some time on this, and rook takes b2, though, is unfortunately met by the engine's best response, bishop to g2. Now the rook is hanging, the knight is hanging, and d5 is still falling in the process, with black's king being in big trouble. So I'm guessing this is what Svidler had in store. But we'll never find out, because black didn't even play the best move. Black played queen c7. And now if you want to pause your video, if you haven't seen Svidler's absolutely brilliant finishing touch to this game, you can try to think about it. It's not that easy, but I will say it combines the fact that white's king is in big trouble with the idea that if the queen is the only piece possible to defend things like a checkmate on d7, maybe there's more ways to stop checkmate on h2 than first meets the eye. So that's all the foreshadowing I can give you. The move after queen a4 check, forcing the king to d8, with d7 being spied. White finds the, in my book, double exclam move, bishop to f4. Mind-blowing. Just sacrificing the bishop straight up to stop checkmate. Queen can't take it because I get there first. So before you get to h2, queen goes to d7. And after knight takes, which was played in the game, you've stopped your own threat of checkmate. Your pieces are getting in each other's way, and here comes white, never looking back. Knight to b5 with tempo, as Peter did, and after queen to b6, the knight moves to d4, and black actually just resigned. Why? Because I'm threatening checkmate on d7, and if and when you try to stop it, there's 1.5 million ways for me to win here. Knight c6 check is one, with all kinds of crazy fun coming. If the king goes to e8, of course, I can take other pieces with discovered check. Even just taking f3 is probably pretty good. Win your piece back, and black's king is still just in a massive amount of trouble. I admit I didn't spend a ton of time with the engine there, because it was just pretty obvious that white would have more than one way to skin the cat and win this game. So again, after knight d4, black just resigned. So this game was awesome, and maybe even worthy of being considered the game of the round. Obviously, as I said, we did two games from round 2 of the 2019 World Cup. You can check out both videos if you happen to just be tuning into this one. We already did one from Maghsoodloo's game, a win over Chigayev, and we also analyzed a game from round 1, Danny Rensch's victory. So hopefully you're enjoying all of our coverage here of one of the biggest events on the 2019 calendar, which is saying something, because there's a lot of big events in the 2019 calendar. And let me remind you, of course, you can go to Chess.com, check out our daily news reports. I've been writing blogs with all kinds of analysis, but just remember, you can go to chess.com/news and check out Peter Docker's report. And of course, we also have the Chess Bras covering things. They are doing so over at their Twitch channel. They've got the one and only Yasser Seirawan. He's bringing the heat. So check them out. They are kind of our official partner stream. And as we said, leave a comment, give us a like, give us a share, give us a subscribe, and we'll see you around on Chess.com.